Last week, Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister travelled to Serbia to meet with Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić. Despite Serbia's traditionally pro-Russia stance, the meeting was remarkably friendly. Vučić was all smiles, the two sides agreed to continue negotiations on a free trade agreement, and they even announced that Zelensky would visit Serbia at a later date, his first visit since the war. So in this video, we're going to explain why Ukraine-Serbia relations are apparently on the up, and what might explain this shift on Serbia's part. Russia once liked to think of itself as a major regional player. Perhaps it still does. But with resources depleting and attention still focused on Ukraine, the country's broader sphere of influence is shrinking. So, in the latest issue of our magazine, we unpack how Russia's influence in their sphere is slipping away. That's just some of 80 pages in the magazine though, because there's more to too long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. In short, Serbia has been one of the most pro-Russia countries in Europe since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Serbia has consistently refused to join in with the EU sanctions on Russia. The Serbian government actually signed a discounted gas deal with the Kremlin in 2022, and Serbian officials and state media have spent much of their time criticising NATO and parroting Kremlin talking points. Serbia's relatively pro-Russian position can be essentially attributed to two things. First, the close cultural ties between ethnic Serbs and Russians. The two countries share a Slavic and Orthodox heritage, a common use of the Cyrillic alphabet, and often refer to one another as brothers in political commentary. Unsurprisingly, this has created an affinity, and polling reliably finds that most Serbs have a positive opinion of Russia and Vladimir Putin specifically. The most recent poll we could find, for instance, conducted by Gallup earlier this year, found that 67% of Serbs have a favourable opinion of Putin, while just 30% have an unfavourable opinion. This implies a net approval rating of +37, higher than that of any other country surveyed. Second, generally speaking, Serbs aren't big fans of NATO. This is obviously a controversial topic that would require at least another video to cover in sufficient detail. But essentially, NATO has made a number of military interventions in the Balkans, often in ways that put it at odds with Serbia. Perhaps the most contentious of these, at least from the Serbian perspective, is the Kosovo War, where, in 1999, NATO intervened decisively on the side of Kosovo, which still houses NATO's largest permanent force. Unlike most of the international community and the vast majority of European states, Serbia refuses to recognise Kosovo as an independent state, and Russia is just one of a handful of nearby countries that takes Serbia's side. Anyway, the point we're trying to make is that Serbia has a complicated history with NATO, which is why they broadly sympathise with Putin's anti-NATO narrative. Now, it hasn't all been smooth sailing, and there have been moments of tension between Serbia and Russia in the 4 years or so since Putin's invasion of Ukraine. For instance, Serbia has consistently refused to recognise Russia's territorial claims in Ukraine, largely because this would undermine Serbia's own argument against Kosovo's statehood. There was also something of a diplomatic crisis in 2023, when the Russian Wagner Group ran a Serbian-language advert asking Serbs to come and fight in Ukraine, prompting an angry response from the Serbian government. Nonetheless, despite the occasional hiccup, Serbia has generally been relatively pro-Russia and anti-Ukraine, at least in a European context. However, this has apparently started to change, and there have been a number of signs, aside from that conspicuously chummy meeting last week, that Serbia is now quietly pushing for a rapprochement with Ukraine. Last summer, for instance, Vučić made his first visit to Ukraine since the full-scale invasion, to attend the Ukraine-Southeast Europe Summit in Odessa. Zelensky then hosted a Serbian delegation in Kyiv in November, although he didn't meet Vučić in person. Perhaps most notably, in April, the Serbian government came out to contradict Hungary's then Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, who implied that Ukrainian operatives had planted explosives along a gas pipeline running through Serbia into Hungary. At the time, this was widely perceived, at least in the West, as essentially a false flag operation, organised by Orbán's government to stoke anti-Ukrainian sentiment ahead of the election. Nonetheless, there was a widespread expectation that Vučić, traditionally an Orbán ally, would go along with it. But that's not what happened. Vučić stayed quiet, and his intelligence chief told the press, quote, "It is not true that the Ukrainians tried to organise this diversion." This was pretty remarkable. The comments did real damage to Orbán's re-election campaign, and the whole episode suggested that Vučić was willing to sell out one of his long-standing allies to maintain good relations with Ukraine. So what's motivating this rapprochement? Well, we see at least 3 reasons. The first one, and the one that Serbian and Ukrainian officials mention most in their readouts, is that Ukraine and Serbia share a common goal. They both want EU membership, and they've apparently decided that they're more likely to get it if they cooperate. This is apparently the same reason that Serbia has recently taken steps to mend relations with Albania, another EU candidate country, and in March, Vučić and Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama published a joint op-ed arguing for a phased process to break the EU's accession deadlock in the German newspaper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. The second and related reason is that Vučić, who has long performed a delicate balancing act between Russia and the EU, seems to be increasingly leaning towards the EU and away from Russia, which has opened up the space for a diplomatic rapprochement with Ukraine. This is presumably largely for economic reasons. While Russia might be able to provide cheap gas, Serbia does far more trade with Europe now, and Vučić wouldn't say no to more EU funding. But it's also because of Kosovo, which used to be a real sticking point in EU-Serbia relations. Serbia used to see Europe as being essentially biased in Kosovo's favour, but in recent months the EU has taken a harsher tone with Kosovo, accusing the government of reneging on various diplomatic agreements and exacerbating tensions with its ethnic Serb population. This has allowed for better relations between Serbia and the EU, which has allowed Vučić to lean away from Russia and pursue a rapprochement with Ukraine. The third reason that Serbia and Ukraine are getting closer is that Vučić might be positioning himself as a potential mediator in Ukraine. With the front lines stabilising, Europe is currently searching for potential mediators in the event of peace negotiations. The EU is apparently considering former German Chancellor Angela Merkel or former Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi, while Putin himself recently suggested Merkel's predecessor Gerhard Schröder. But these three aren't great options, not least because they've all been out of frontline politics for years, and it's at least possible that Vučić, who enjoys functional relations with both Ukraine and Russia, is getting in line. This might sound speculative, but it's notable that Vučić paid a trip to Beijing right after Putin, where he even said, quote, "Maybe I'll resign." If that happens, it would be a diplomatic win in and of itself, and would also give Vučić some much-needed leverage over the EU. The latest issue of our magazine, Too Long, is out now, and if you want our best value ever, subscribing and using the code SUMMER26 gets you your first copy for as cheap as £4.99, as well as 20% off as long as you stay subscribed. I actually told you about one of the articles in this edition of the magazine at the start of this video, but this issue's also jam-packed with other content from all around the world. Obviously, the headline section is our rundown of Trump's wars around the world, discussing all of the different countries and regions which have faced Trump's military wrath, going nation by nation through the timeline, and reaching the ultimate question, has Trump launched a modern holy war? From there, we dive into our regional sections, starting with the UK, where we unpack the results of the recent May elections, take a look at the UK's odd foreign posture, and discuss whether Britain has become ungovernable. Then in the EU section, we discuss how Russia's sphere of influence is fading, why Europe's energy transition isn't what you expect, and also look at the Euro's missing members. Finally, in the global section, we discuss if we're seeing echoes of the First World War, what's next for Iran, as well as what really came from the Gen Z protests we saw emerging last year. But that's not even everything. With this 80-page issue, our joint longest ever, there's even more to read than I've even been able to mention here. So click the link in the description to learn more and grab your copy of Too Long today.